Good evening everyone. Today we have our business editor Mr. Srinivas who is going to give you insight about the Union Budget 2019-20 which was presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. So sir, what do you think about the budget?
I think there are some 3-4 big takeaways from the budget.
Right.
One, I think, is that this government has realized that the grand welfare schemes that it had, like Swachh Bharat Mission and others, have worked very successfully with the people of India, both in terms of social benefits and in terms of political mileage, which also translated into electoral votes and electoral victory, the grand victory that they had. And hence they have decided to continue with these schemes in a much bigger and larger fashion. So they have expanded the Swachh Bharat Mission to include solid waste, and they have expanded the Awas Yojana and given incentives for that. And I think this comes from what the Economic Survey said. The Economic Survey basically said that these welfare schemes have actually been able to create behavior changes in the communities and in the people and in the individuals, which means that the effectiveness of these schemes was not related to what the government did or tried to do, but it actually accelerated the process because the people mindset and behavior changed, and hence they adopted to these schemes in a much larger fashion. So I think that's one big takeaway. The second, I think, is the government has very clearly realized that manufacturing or pure agriculture or just formal and informal sectors cannot create the jobs that we really want. So they want to convert India into an entrepreneur's country. Hence there is a huge kind of SOPs to startups, to angel investors, to self-help groups, especially women SHGs, to farmers to kind of augment their incomes through other means like cooperatives, dairy farming, fisheries, etc. And also to Dalit entrepreneurs through Stand Up India, so they have kind of extended the period of Stand Up India. So I think entrepreneurship will be the key to job creation in the near future, and I think this will kind of determine the success or failure of this government in this second term, because if it really takes off, it can actually create a large number of jobs, but if it doesn't work out, then I think we'll have a problem and they'll have to do a kind of course correction. The third thing which I personally like is that Nirmala Sitharaman has for the first time, actually the government has for the first time talked about the jobs for the future. So there was this whole skill set and skill enhancement plans for the last several years, not just this government or the previous one, but even before that. But those were imparting skills of the past and of the present. Nobody was talking about skills required for the future. So Sitharaman in this budget has actually talked how to kind of impart skills for the future. So in artificial intelligence or robotics or automation or something like that, how to impart those skills. So you're actually creating a generation which will be employable and at much higher salaries for the next 10 to 20 years, and not just for the next 1 year or 2 years. Similarly, they have given a boost to artisans in traditional industries, because those are labor intensive industries and they create a lot of jobs. So that, I think, is another way to create self-employment and self-employed individuals. I think these are the key things. The rest of the budget is basically tinkering with the issues that the stakeholders has raised, kind of moving a thing from one shelf to the other, or moving a cabinet from one place to another position, kind of clarifying the situation, clearing the air, clearing the kind of small whips which are kind of had gathered around the issues and stuff like that. The biggest dissatisfaction is that there were no big bang reforms, no major structural reforms. Although Sitharaman in her speech talked about structural reforms, talked about the virtuous cycle of growth, savings, exports, manufacturing, investments, all those things, she said the right things, but there was nothing to indicate that she did the right things too. So maybe that will come in the second budget or the third budget. It's an ongoing thing. This government has 5 more years to go, so they can do a lot of things. They can also do mid-course correction. Budget is not the only policy document with them. So I hope that this is not the end of it, but only a small beginning, and they will take it forward.
Do you think the budget has taken a cue from the economic survey? Because when it comes to education sector, they have the finance minister talked about Study in India, a new program where they plan to bring foreign students to India. So it's a clever way of using Indian educational institutions, keeping in mind the future demographic profile and utilizing Indian institutions.
I think this is for the first time, at least in my view and what I'm seeing, that the budget took a lot of cues from the economic survey. So if you really look at education, that was one cue that they took, because the survey said that the whole demographics that we have been seeing, the demographic dividend will change by 2030 and 2040. We'll have many more older people, we'll have much less younger people below 14 years. So bulk of your population will be between say 14 to 45 or 14 to 50. And for them, how do you kind of create opportunities? So higher education is clearly one of them. And Study in India is basically, I think, more of a PR exercise, because Indian institutions need to be world class. They need to do a lot to become world class. Although Sitharaman said that a few years ago, none of the Indian institutions were in the top 200 list of universities. Now we have 3, but 2 IITs and IISc, Indian Institute of Science. But I think more need to be added, more things need to be done before we can actually attract students. Even now we attract a lot of foreign students, but they come from Africa and a few other places. But we can do that, but it will require a lot of effort. Similarly, the economic survey talked about using big data to kind of improve public policy and improve efficiency of your welfare mechanism. So the whole thing about digital India and all those things they are doing is, I think they are in the process of dealing with data and creating data to help the ultimate beneficiaries. So I think the economic reforms, the economic survey was a clear indicator of what the budget had. Actually, in retrospect we can say that, but there were a lot of things in the survey which again Sitharaman mentioned but has done nothing about it, like the virtuous cycle of savings, exports, investments and things like that. So she talked about it, but I don't see any indicators of how she's going to do that. And what is the vision? What is the holistic blueprint? What will the country look like in next 5 to 10 years? Okay, we'll become a $5 trillion economy, which she says is achievable and which will possibly happen in a few years. She didn't give a time frame though, so a few years could be 5 to 10 years. But how do we reach there? And what do we need to get there? And what do we need to do to get there? And what are the kind of issues we need to grapple with? I think that kind of holistic, comprehensive scenario was missing from this budget. Maybe she didn't have the time, maybe the elections got over only in May and she had to present the budget on July 5th. Maybe there was a lot of pulls and pressures on what to do in the budget, which invariably happens in the first budget after you win an election. There are too many kind of contradictory and differences of pressures and pulls on you to kind of take these measures. So maybe all that happened, but I thought she would actually come out with a blueprint and a plan for India in say 2030 or 2040.
Okay, my last question. One of the innovative announcements which market is feeling is forming a social sector exchange. If you could just give us a little insight. I mean, although there is no blueprint, there is no clarity, no white paper on how a social entrepreneur would be defined. How do you see this move of having a social
See, I think the social stock exchange has to be seen in a wider context of how this government wants to expand the investor base in the country. So apart from the social stock exchange, which I'll talk about in a little while, she has taken a lot of steps to expand the investor base. For instance, the minimum public holding in listed companies has been increased from 25 to 35%. Not been increased, but she's asked SEBI to explore the issue, which means that all listed companies will have to kind of sell 10% extra shares to retail investors, which will automatically expand the market. She has said that foreign portfolio investors, their cap in listed companies can increase from 24% to the sectoral limit. So if the sector limit of FDI is 49%, the foreign institutional investors can increase to 49%, but each company's board will have to ratify it and ratify the increase. They can also not do it. So which means that there will be more investment from foreigners, which means that base will increase. She has eased the KYC norm for some of the foreign investors. So that will, I think, push more money into the Indian market. But it will also suck out the liquidity as more and more stocks are there to be bought. It will also suck out the liquidity. So I don't know how that will play. So in that context, when you're trying to kind of expand investor attraction to your Indian stock market, the National Stock Exchange can actually work quite well, because it will give a lot of opportunities to social entrepreneurs if they are included in the list of people who are eligible to list on the exchange. It will kind of encourage a lot of people to enter into these so-called social sectors for profit and for giving dividends to their shareholders. So I think it's an interesting concept, although it's not been tried in a emerging nation or a developed country. But Indian stock markets are mature enough. I think they can handle such an exchange. But the policy has to be crafted very carefully.
So overall, how would you see this budget?
I see this budget more of a technical budget, which is trying to sort out the problems of the various stakeholders and the various sectors and the various kinds of investors. It's lacking on, as I said, big bang structural reforms, and I think it is a continuity of some of the big welfare schemes that the government has started in the last 5 years and expanding them. So I think it's a combination of these three things.
So we hope that a small insight by Outlook business team would help you to get a little gist of Union Budget 2018-19. Thank you for watching.